hello. Happy Friday. Wow, look at that. Right on the dot. I timed that pretty well, huh? Tim was like, hey, how many more minutes before? I was like, oh, crap, we got to go. Click. We were all bantering in the green room, and I literally just shut everybody up and hit go. So, hey, welcome. Happy Friday. November 3rd already. Oh, my goodness. Where the heck did the year go? My gosh. So Halloween is done. Is it time for our Christmas decorations? We can just forget about that thing with the turkey in between, or like, how was everybody's Halloween? Jesse, did you take the kids out there and do some treating and get some?
There's not much to trick or treat around here, but what I will say is that one thing that I did this year that I've never done before is I left my Christmas lights up all year round, so I don't have to put those up. They're still on the house.
Love it.
And I can hear my dad's voice coming down from above, saying, chiding me and chastising me for not taking those Christmas lights down because he always hated that.
Truth be told, I never take mine down, only when they're broken and I have to replace them. So I'm right there with you, right? Yeah. And generally it's like, oh, I'm like looking outside. It's like 90 degrees in July. And I'm like, I should probably deal with those Christmas lights. And then I think about it and actually do it in like 4 feet of snow. So this week, Insider.
Where to go? Yeah.
Insider threat, is that even a thing? Like, what the heck? What are we talking about? IP? Like intellectual property? Like, hey, we got some really special guests. Let's just take a minute here and allow everybody to kind of introduce themselves. And while you're up first, Catherine, thank you for joining us. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here on your podcast today. I'm Catherine Marinas Yacoub, and I'm a principal with Control Risks. I'm based out of our New York office. And I support clients to manage and mitigate their insider risks and help protect their intellectual assets. Great to be here.
That's awesome. Are you? Is that a virtual background, or is that like your office?
It's the office.
Wow, that's like super cool because I got the fake olive tree and whatever, but I like the stripes, the glass door, and the brick. It's really cool. And so up next we have our good friend John. John, why don't you come off mute and say hello, my friend John?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me all the way from the UK. So Halloween is kind of an American thing that's really taken off over here, but my kids are far too old, so haven't been involved in any Halloween things. I've been in IP, I think it's 22 years now. I met Tim back in 2010, I think it was, and we worked together in IP then, and we've followed similar paths maybe, but the last maybe 6 years we've sort of diverged. I've stuck with IP strategy, and Tim's sort of got the information security component of that. And to be fair, to be honest, I've only just really woken up in the last 6 months to the importance of the intersection between protecting, defending intellectual property and the whole intersector management of information security. So really pleased to be on this call today because I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff for business. So I help businesses with IP strategy. And, my point going in today is that everybody is going to tell you they've got trade secrets. Everybody depends on trade secrets, but next to nobody can defend their trade secrets. And that's where it's at. And that's where I think we might have some good conversation today. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. Glad to have you here. Hey, Jesse, what's going on in your world?
Yeah, we got some news. We're expecting our third. So it's I guess it's LinkedIn official now.
So, congratulations, my friend. That's very exciting. Your third. Yeah. Any hints on do you do the whole gender, boy, girl, whatever it happens to be, pink, blue, yellow, green, or golden?
We didn't for the first two, but I don't think they're going to let us get away with it this third time. My oldest she is quite precocious and quite opinionated, and she basically has already said we're going to find out. So we're going to follow her lead, and I think we're going to find out ahead of time. So
there you go. And let me guess, we just said it a minute ago. It's November 3rd. You got the no shave November going on there? Or what are you doing?
I think I've got the crazy. I got the crazy week of November going on here. Crazy start to November. So yeah, we've had all sorts of things going on in the family this speech meet at school, and I just let it go, just letting it rock.
So how's Power PSA?
Yeah, so I'm with Power PSA Consulting. We help MSPs build, scale, and profit from security programs for their clients.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, you heard it here first. Jesse's gonna be a daddy 3 times over. We're very excited for you. Thank you so much for allowing us and allowing our MSPs and our community here to be one of the first to know. Well, okay, probably not the first to know, but at least throwing that out there. So thanks, Jesse. We're very excited for you.
Thank you.
Live from Dave & Buster's, it's Tim Schnurr.
Hey guys, can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
So yeah, I'm really excited about this episode. We've been talking about this for a couple months now. Worked with John Pryor at global intellectual property broker for a couple years. We were the biggest, patent and IP broker for a while, and really moved over to cybersecurity. Couple years at the Big Four, and it's amazing as patents have kind of been diminished and trade secrets have become more important. There's really been this collision between intangible proprietary assets at firms, and let me just tell you, small businesses, you have intangible assets, whether it's customer lists, whether it's what we're spending on Google AdWords, whether it's the firm's finances. There's so much intangible internal assets that you don't realize insiders have. So I think largely on this episode, we usually talk about insider threat as someone who gives away his credentials and gets hacked, like MGM or something like that. But today we really want to talk about, this enormous potential risk, which is a potential opportunity for, outsourced security providers like MSPs and MSSPs and VCSOs to really make a difference for their customers, to really help them protect it. And it weaves in extremely nicely with kind of what everyone does here on the phone. I mean, Tim Golden has a fantastic compliance risk, GRC tool that can help you, put things in place. Jesse's helping VCSOs really get left of boom and be protective and increase their posture. So, really excited about this episode, where it's going to go. So, like I said, be patient here. And I think there's real opportunities, whether, no matter what your maturity is as a service provider, we're really excited about that. So why don't Tim, I'll kick things off. I know I'm a little long in the tooth here. I'm Tim Schnurr from Cavello. I'm really excited about the tool we work with, because we have playbooks and tools to help track, prevent, investigate insider threat, which I think, like I said, if you don't come away from this episode thinking that insider threat isn't a big deal, it really is. So why don't we start with Catherine? And
I don't get an intro? Well, thanks a lot. Fine.
Tim, I mean, you started the show, so I thought you had an intro. Tim, why don't you go? Why don't we?
I actually have an anecdote, a story, like I always do, to share that is really about IP, intellectual property. And before I do that, can you fix the little thing on your microphone? Because it's kind of like falling off, and I'm like, it looks very dumb. So anyways, Tim Golden, founder of Risk Compliance Scorecard. This whole concept of insider threat, right, or intellectual property, right? We're going to dive into this here a little bit more, but I have an anecdote for you. So those of you that know me know that I was pretty heavily involved in the beer community here in New England. And several years ago, probably 10, 12, don't quote me on the dates, there was a very popular beer that came out once a year, this time of year. We'll call the beer, Bobby. I don't know, whatever, it doesn't matter. And this was a very special beer. And they took a lot of time to promote it, to brew it. It was only limited, very exclusive, right? And so it became very popular. Everybody rushed to this brewery to get this beer back before this big beer explosion. And every year they'd come out, and so fast forward 5 or 6 years, they've built this brand, they've built this cult following. The beer was amazing, by the way. And for whatever reasons, I don't know the details, the brewer and the brewery parted ways. Here's the problem. The brewer owned the recipe. The brewery that invested all the marketing and all the stuff and all the whatever to build out this great brand around this amazing one-of-a-kind product didn't actually own the rights to make the product. So the person left, started his own brewery, renamed it. Everybody that knew him and knew the beer all went over and followed the new beer and the new brewery, and they were left holding the bag, right? So how does that relate to us as MSPs? And how does that relate to our clients? Well, I think that's why we're all here today with professionals like John and Catherine and Tim and the rest of us here. How does that all play in? I think that today is a great topic to learn. Hey, your brewery went out of business because you didn't own the rights to the actual recipe. Mm-hmm. All right. I can leave with an anecdote and everybody goes silent.
Yeah, I think Tim was
on
muted
mute.
there.
I'm mute. I apologize. And I'd love to kind of just kick this off. And Catherine, Catherine will go first, then John, really about, talk about some of the engagements that you work in. I know you can't get too specific, and this is a very kind of sensitive subject, obviously, so we won't talk about countries or anything like that, but really talk about some of the strategies that you're using at a high level to protect mostly large organizations. I'm guessing some medium-sized organizations, but first of all, what are some of the big misconceptions, and what are you doing to help these companies navigate? There you go.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, as far as misconceptions, I think a lot of companies just think about, all right, we'll do training to talk about data protection, protecting our critical assets. That's usually done when employees are onboarding into the organization, and then not too much else is really done about that. And employees generally don't really understand the types of data that they're handling and the impact that it can have if it's disclosed or compromised. And so what companies really need to do, getting to your second question there, Tim, as far as measures that companies can take, I would say first and foremost is companies need to identify what all their critical assets are. So not just their IP, not just their intellectual assets, but everything else, as you mentioned, right? It could be, marketing strategies or pricing or customer lists, or it could be their, yearly strategies. And so trying to identify what all those critical assets are across the organization, and then where they're located and who has access to them and who the owners are. And it's a painstaking process. It really is the first time that you do it. Mm-hmm. However, after you do it the first time, it's really easy to tweak. It should be done very frequently and routinely, at least on an annual basis. But more importantly, to track those who enter the organization, move around within the organization, or separate from the organization. So once you have that done, it serves multiple purposes, and it really pays back dividends. So that also allows you to see where you need to focus your controls and your measures, and really zeroing in on those crown jewels, if you will, of the organization, and prioritizing where you're going to spend your money and your effort, because quite honestly, there isn't enough time or money to do everything. And also when there's a disclosure or unauthorized disclosure of these intellectual assets or critical assets, it becomes very easy to triage who has access, where they are, when something happens, when there's an actual incident.
Good perspective. Thank you.
That's great. And John, why don't you talk about some of the consequences and, maybe fast forward into the future and lessons you've learned, right? Like looking backwards, things I needed to do, or things you should do, or things you should make sure you secure, right? And that's an open question. So John, you're on mute, but love to hear your thoughts.
Very broad question, and I completely concur with what Catherine's just said. But vis-a-vis what I do, I think Catherine is far more large companies. I'm generally SMB. I would say up to about 500 people organizations. Usually, some a little bit bigger. But the issue I have really, Tim, is people come to me when it's too late. They come to me when there's an issue, and the whole purpose, the whole mission for me is to try and get people to be proactive. Because ultimately, what you've got is, as I said at the upset, at the beginning there, it was like everybody's got trade secrets, right? But nobody can defend them. Nobody can defend them because, as you said, in that scenario where somebody walks out with a customer list, we got a case. They walked out with a customer list, and as I think I heard you say, but there's case law around this. Okay, so we go to court. The judge says you need to show me that he knew this was the customer list was a trade secret. You need to show me that it was managed as a trade secret. You need to show me that he had, or she had, a contract that required him to defend trade secrets. Because if none of those are fulfilled, then there's no case to answer. Right. And that's what you find in most cases. You don't actually have people think they've got trade secrets, but people don't actually put the structure around them to enact a trade secret program. And the issue we've got here, Tim Schnur, at the head of the program, 12 years ago, 10 years ago, when we were working on this in a big way, the world was around patents. And I think, as you've alluded to, patents are no longer what they used to be. In your courts in the States, when we go to the courts with our patents, 75% of the time, the claims in those patents are found to be invalid. So everybody is now saying, IBM are now saying, you can't rely on patents. You need patents, but you need trade secrets. Now, when people say IP, they think patent and trademark. As you said, they don't think know-how, expertise, confidential information, and they may think trade secrets, but they're unregistered rights. So there's no governmental-driven program for you to put in place to capture that. And as Catherine's just outlined, there are steps you need to take. But in my experience, most organizations are not taking those steps. And that means they're going to fall over.
Yeah.
They may think they have trade secrets. 80% of execs in a recent EUI study, Economist Intelligence Unit EIU study, said they got trade secrets. But 80% of those hadn't put the processes in place to manage and defend those trade secrets.
And there you
that's
go,
big
right?
companies, by the way. That's not SMBs. So,
and that's a lot of what I tend to talk about, right?
Ball's right in your wheelhouse, right, Tim? And it sounds perfect.
Right? So
there you go. There's the softball.
Right? So everybody likes to talk about CIS controls, right? Everybody likes to talk about, where do we go, what framework, right? So we talk a lot about CIS, IG1, asset management. But when we think asset management, we think switches and printers and laptops. We don't think about customer lists, or in the case of the brewery, the recipe, or other aspects of the business, right? So, there's a lot of different things to consider in the asset category, right? This is why having two parts, a data classification document, like things like Velo can help you do, classifying the data. But even before that, having an information classification policy, talking about information that's within the business, right? We do hear a lot about PII or social security numbers or CUI. We hear about those things. We don't ever really talk as an MSP to our customers about customer lists, patents. Yeah, we mentioned that a few minutes ago, but their secret sauce on how they're doing their business, where their data, all those other parts of the business that we just tend to ignore or forget or not even think about.
Right. Yeah. And I think, both John and Catherine said one thing each that kind of perked my ears up, something newer that I've been doing with my clients as I onboard them to vCISO services. And that's, crown jewels, thinking of them as crown jewels, and then actually showing that we're managing these trade secrets as trade secrets. And so there's a GRC software that I'm using for a couple clients that have a lot of this information, and they take you through what's called a crown jewels exercise. And so you get all the executives in a room and you do these workshops to say, hey, what are our trade secrets? What are our M&A? What is our roadmap formulas? all these different pieces of data. And I was like, well, yeah, like, what about this server? It's on that server. And it's like, no, we have to think more about the data. Let's talk about the data, and then we can map that through to our assets, right? Let's identify what the trade secrets are, what are our most critical crown jewels, and what constitute an existential event, right? Because trade secrets walking out the door, it's not like a ransomware, you're immediately down in the water, but that could have been an existential event 1 year from now when your competition and your competitive edge is completely eroded because of it. So I think it's really important that you start identifying those, especially at an executive level, and get buy-in on the program that we're going to start managing these as trade secrets and protecting them as such. And so I really appreciate both of the perspectives that John and Catherine brought to that.
Yeah. So Catherine, I was going to talk a little bit about like when an employee joins a firm, what are some of the things that lock in those trade secrets or intangible assets? You want to talk a little bit about, contracts and things like that?
Yeah, sure. I would even back up a little bit before the employee is onboarded, and want to emphasize the importance of screening employees, particularly those that are going to be filling high consequence positions. You want to try to eliminate bad actors from coming into the organization as much as possible, because once they're in, then you're dealing with a lot of issues, right? But screening is so important, and many organizations do background checks. Many of them don't. And when they do background checks, they're pretty minimal. You'd be surprised at how many organizations and companies don't check the education and degrees, right? And that may not seem like a big thing, but there's so many employees who do lie about that, and it becomes an integrity issue, right? Which can then lead to other behaviors once they're in the organization. Right. But verifying their past employment and what they did, and speaking to references and past supervisors to determine if there were any issues is so critically important. So very important to really start at the very, very beginning. And then, of course, once they come on board, to get that training about how to handle those intellectual and critical assets in the organization. And that shouldn't just be done, it's not one and done. That should be done at least on an annual basis. Yeah. And then have continuous awareness throughout the year across the workforce. But yes, absolutely, Tim, having those agreements in place in the employee contract, as far as, how they're going to protect company information, confidentiality agreements, right? NDAs, non-competes. Now they're looking at doing away with non-compete agreements in some sectors. So that's even more of a reason for companies to put in those extra measures in place.
Good points, really good points.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was just going to say,
go ahead. We'll get to Shane's in a minute.
I was just going to add a quick rider onto that, is that, especially with the non-competes and those being irrelevant basically now, it's like, how do you control residuals at all? It's almost meaningless, right? So, yeah, anyways.
Yeah.
So let me pull up Shane's comment.
Catherine's...
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Cool.
Go ahead.
So Catherine's point, that just underlines and re-emphasizes the importance of trade secrets, that non-competes are eroding. If you've got a trade secrets program in place, that's how you defend your confidential information and know-how these days, because non-competes are not sufficient. I just wanted to pick up on NDA, because I think they are absolutely essential, but I think they are utilized in a very loose and fast way. I keep saying to my clients, okay, so you got an NDA, so you're good, right? Well, yeah, we're good. Okay, so how do you detect if somebody's taken your confidential information? How can you detect it?
Right.
How do you know they've done it?
You have Cavello, right, Tim? How do you detect it? Well, you label it appropriately. You have a policy, you have a procedure, you have enforcement stuff in those policies and procedures that employees have been trained on through handbooks and other stuff. Then you use Cavello to actually. I'm sorry, I digress.
No, I mean, so John, Tim's jumping right ahead to the court case, John. Right, in 3 years from now, it's like I kind of asked you before. I'm like, if you could do it all again, right, you'd have great contracts, you'd have an NDA, you'd have trade secret catalog, then you'd have the actual cybersecurity tools enforcing those.
New term, trade secret catalog.
Yeah.
How many
Yeah,
people
well,
have actually talked about trade secret catalog?
catalogs? I'll let John do that one. But you know, the digital paper trail is possible now, where you can catch these people red-handed. And
Mhm.
I don't know what movie it is. We're like, don't get caught, right? Like, well, now guess what? You will get caught, and as soon
Mhm.
as more people are caught, we can build. You know, people will understand that like they get in trouble. Anyone has a friend or people they know in finance, like people get caught for this all the time, like taking a deck out of a bank or something, or people actually do get caught, and there are serious consequences. So
Mhm.
it's less common in the SMB world. It will become more common, right? Like John said, like non-competes aren't existent, but like there are ways to go about it here. Where, by the way, when you work somewhere, just because you made that deck, it's not yours. I'm sorry. Like you don't get to walk out the door with it.
Work
The customer
property.
list. Yeah, that's right. That's right. So
I'm literally going through an employee contract today, and there's a big paragraph from our legal team about work product, and I was like, "Oh, that's a good idea." Thank goodness I have lawyers that know that stuff better than I do, because I'm like, "Oh yeah, like I don't want them stealing my decks, well, or whatever." But yeah, interesting thoughts. Interesting thoughts.
John, why don't you define trade secret catalog and why it's important and what it does for you, what kind of leverage it gives you?
Yeah, perfect. And it carries on from, I think Catherine mentioned having a list, just identifying what it is you've got. I think the first thing I say to clients is prioritize which, what information would you least like your competitors to get their hands on? If you left your business tomorrow to set up in competition, what would you really like to take with you? And that starts to help people to prioritize, as you said, what's existential, what's going to damage the sort of the bottom line, and so on and so forth. You put in that kind of priority, you start to get the list. You then need to capture the trade secrets, and this is the catalog. So you need a cataloging system to manage them, and you're not actually capturing the actual trade secret here. You're using metadata to describe it. So the description, brief summary of what it does without revealing the secret source, and then who's responsible for it, who came up with it, who created it, what dates, the date of origination, really important. Who it's been socialized with, under what contracts, when those contracts, etc., etc. And you do it once, but you have to keep on top of it. So there's a 3, 6 month, 12-month review cycle on that. So there's two separate things. I guess there's maybe three: a rough list and then a catalog on a system. But then you also need to document the trade secrets. You need to actually document those separately, because you need to be able to point back to 5th of December 2017 when you actually came up with that customer list or that know-how. You need to be able to prove that you had it at that point in time. So again, really interested to hear what you guys have got to say about date stamping. What technology would you use for digital rights management to show that you had that document, as of 5th of December 2017? Really important, of course, as well.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
Yeah, Catherine, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Sorry about that.
No.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything that John has said. And I know Tim mentioned it a little bit at the beginning, the importance of having a data classification program within the organization for a couple reasons, right? First is when you label documents as, business confidential or sensitive or public, there's no excuse if employees really mishandle it that they didn't know, because it's, there's a big label right there staring at them in the face. But with that, you need the training, and again, repetitive training of how to handle these different levels and classifications of information, how to store them, how to travel, or when they're in transit, how to dispose of them, and that has to be constantly reiterated so people don't forget. But I think going back to what John was mentioning, and that timestamp, and John, this is probably more in your lane, but when you demonstrate that you have taken measures to try to protect certain types of information, in this case, IP or intellectual assets, and there is an incident of IP theft that happens, or some kind of disclosure, or corporate espionage, then especially from an insider, then it has teeth from a legal perspective, that it demonstrates that the company did take certain steps to protect that data, to make it stand out from other data, and this way, when it does go to court, they can demonstrate that.
Awesome.
Yeah. So it was kind of funny because we do our documentation reviews frequently throughout the course of the year, month after month after month, and I was looking at the information classification policy that was written in 2006,
Mm-hmm.
and it literally talks about business, identifying stuff within the business and labeling it BII, right, instead of PII. It's business information, right, instead of personal information, right? And John, I think you brought it up about metadata, right, and date time stamping of stuff. Yeah, so there are some kind of put a document on your computer, it gets date time stamped.
Mm-hmm.
But now in this world of SaaS, where things kind of live in SaaS, actually one of the things that we did with our product, and I'm not going to plug my product, but what I'm going to say is there's an actual standardized format of how you do a date time stamp according to the world of IP lawyers and people like Catherine and John. And so when I started to put this together, I'm like, I want to make sure that I'm using the international standard of date time. And I actually had to go back to my developers and was like, change these database fields to this structure so that it meets this requirement. And people, and they thought I was crazy. And I'm like, no, there's things like lots of stuff to think about. So even just all the way down to the date timestamp and how that is formatted and measured and retained along the way.
Yeah. So, and Tim, on top of that, like I said, the cybersecurity tools are, they're not built for this, but they're doing a great job enforcing it. As the actions or the activity, the data access history. What did an employee do the last 2 weeks before they left? What did they access? Who did they send files to?
You mean IG7, IG8, the audit logging stuff? I always forget the control numbers. Don't hold me to the numbers, but audit logging, that's a thing.
And then, as you said, things being marked. You can even mark files with. I joke about this. I don't know if anyone saw this on CNBC, that people were putting white text on resumes to submit, and then they'd have 5,000 words of metadata, and they'd get an interview maybe, right? Because the machine is reading it, right? But there's a lot of tricks. There's watermarking. There's white text. There's it's actually better because Catherine said, it clearly says confidential, clearly says trade secret, clearly says this. I've got an employee contract that says don't misappropriate that. So, it's really fitting nicely into left of boom, people processes and technology. Like all this stuff can really slot into Tim's policies and procedures and things like that. And then you really have the tools here to enforce it. Right. And the more people that get caught, unfortunately, people will be afraid of actually getting caught and be, and realize they just can't walk out with things. And because a lot of times it's just really obvious. And that's how those, but we talked about, I don't know if we talked about Uber Waymo, right? That wasn't a patent trial, right? That was a trade secret case, right? They walked out with autonomous driving patents. Clearly most of our clients are not autonomous driving companies, but they still have customer lists and they just have so much intelligence about the company. And by the way, when that employee leaves, they're not going to some random company. They are always going to the direct competitor, right? I'm going to use those skills and bring them across the street and go to the direct competitor. So
I see Jesse keep trying to chime in here, my friend.
Jesse. I'm smiling because I'm thinking about a specific incident that happened early on in our MSP, and this was years ago. We had a salesperson that we caught wind that he was leaving. I don't know exactly how, but we put some monitoring on his computer, and sure enough, he caught him red-handed moving customer lists out to his personal OneDrive. Luckily caught him before he, and confronted him about it. He admitted it, and there was some legal action. I think the ownership was pretty lenient in that they didn't litigate against him. They just did a cease and desist and said, hey, you can't have contact with the rest of the company and things like that. So, but that was a good example of catching it. So that's where I really wanted to go with this and get a feedback from John and Catherine is, I think the point to that is that, right, once that was happened, every other salesperson kind of knew, like, okay, there's a chance this could happen. So let's not, we don't want to do that, basically. But barring that, are there ways now, rather than, the threat or catching someone and being reactive, what are some proactive measures that you've seen in the last 6 to 12 months that you feel are a potential path forward for prevention rather than reaction?
So I'm going to let Catherine and John, the experts, answer that, but I'm going to chime in real quick with what I did, right? So we have a CRM. CRM has multiple roles and permissions, even all the way down to granular stuff. As you all know, I brought in Frank to help us with client success. Frank is amazing. I love Frank. He does really good work. But before I actually put Frank in the platform, I set the roles with no export. Right? Not because I don't trust Frank, right? Not because he's not, trustworthy person, but I went through and I managed and I edited all the granular things of who can do what. Yeah. Now that we did bump up to a spot where it was like, hey, Tim, I can't do that. The platform won't let me. And I was like, by design. So, I mean, it's not because I don't trust Frank. I do trust Frank, right? He's my employee. Like, he works for us. Right. I want to be able to protect that customer list that I work so hard. Right now, it's just us. So me, yes, I work so hard to put together. I don't know to take them and go on and do no. So I, trying to put some, some guidelines, just like compliance, put some guardrails in place, right? So, John, to answer Tim's question, Jesse's questions, what are some of the things that can be done?
Well, listen, I'm going to disappoint you because there's no magic formula or potion here or secret sauce. It's the people. It's, I think we touched on it already, and I know it's a big topic for you guys, but the key thing for any trade secrets program is to get your people to understand what on earth a trade secret is, and to think about that red line on the revometer on the car. You can go to 5,500 revs, but you cannot go to 6. You cannot go to 7, because if you reveal anything above that red line, you are revealing our trade secrets. And here, by the way, are our trade secrets. This is what's in the red line. It's really about, so twofold. I think we hinted at that this earlier. It's a little bit like having that Doberman on your garden gate, and people going, I'm not going to burgle that house because the Doberman's going to bite me. So, the more you talk to your people internally and you send the message externally that you're on top of this, the less likely there's going to be any form of theft. But really, it is the insider threat, and mainly it's inadvertent. It's not deliberate. People reveal these secrets because people are people. They want to impress. They overshare, and secret sauce gets leaked all the time because I'm out there and I'm trying to win that contract, and I want that guy to really give me the business. So I'm going to tell him more than I should about that secret stuff we've been working on. So he's impressed. So he wants to work with us long term. Bang, the trade secret's gone. So, no magic potion I'm giving you there at all, Tim. It is about the people, and it's about prevention is better than cure. And ultimately that, and I know you've talked about this previously, it's about how do you build that into a business? Because you can't impose it. You have to engender it and grow it from within. And, that's over to you.
Thanks. Catherine, what about you?
Yeah, well said, John. It really is. It does come down to the people. And I think this is where culture within an organization plays such a key role in security and getting the people on board. and making them feel like they're part of the solution, and having them understand why it's important, right? So that their company can continue to have that competitive advantage and get that revenue, which means that they have job security. So, going about it that way, I think really helps to get employees on board, just from a cultural perspective. And again, the constant awareness of how to protect those critical assets. I think another thing that is useful for companies to do is to inform their employees of, what are the current trends that are out there, and how bad actors may be trying to penetrate the organization and target, their employees, right? Them specifically, and what to look out for.
MGM.
There's so much on social media targeting, for example, right? And just it looks very innocent, and it's asking employees to do a white paper, right? And times have been difficult the last couple of years from a financial standpoint and the economic downturn, and so employees are looking to make an extra buck here and there. And so they kind of jump on that, not realizing that it could be a competitor that's on the other side of that.
Yeah. And I think, and I agree with that. All of what everyone said. I think culture is going to be your 80-20 rule. Like that's, 20% of culture improvement is going to give you 80% of results in terms of protecting these things. Right. So I'm going to go out to the fringes a little bit here and talk about some extreme cases. I've seen some things recently where hackers are using OSINT, people who have bad SecOps. They'll find out where their kids go to school, and they'll start texting them and saying, hey, let us detonate this malware on the network. Your kids live here. Do you want us to come by and shoot your kids' school up? And I was actually reading some things about hackers doing this, and I was like, wow, that is just insane, right? So what if you have somebody who falls for that? And so, technical controls, I've seen some things like using enterprise browser to put watermarks and stamps on pages. So even Tim, you mentioned not having export rules. So somebody could still take a picture with their phone, but if they take a picture with their phone, it timestamps their name and the picture in watermarks all over the page. So they're less likely to share that because they know they're going to be caught. And so I think there's some new controls coming out that can help with that. And then again, as everyone said, it's good fences make good neighbors type of thing. So I think that there are some new technologies that can be leveraged for those types of things. And so I really appreciate the feedback that everyone's given so far on that.
Yeah,
one more thing on this. We're talking about preventive measures, and this isn't necessarily preventive, but you can run like almost like an IP tabletop, right? Like you could run, see how your tools are working, catch someone doing something not deadly, inadvertently, like John said, and maybe just sit them down and warn them and say, like, this isn't a major case, but like we need to be more careful. Like this is something, things like this, are important to us. Like they have value in the firm, and any of those conversations you can have kind of early. Once again, setting expectations. It's worth its. Setting expectations is always important, and that might just reset expectations by saying, oh, the business owner didn't like the way we did that, or didn't write that white paper that Catherine was talking about, and kind of expose something. So I think that's one thing that, I don't know if that's left of boom or preventative, Jesse, but you simulations, tabletops happen, right? So they can be really helpful.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's left of boom. Yeah, because you're doing the simulation to prepare.
So let me just do a little rearranging here. Put you over there. Yeah, that's good. All right. So let's break this down into practical terms, right? We got about 10 or 15 minutes left here. Like, I am an MSP. My clients are 5 to 7 employees, right? They're not enterprise. They're not these big with IP lawyers and privacy people and handbooks. They're not. So what do I do? Like, I have Johnny's Bakery. I have the brewery, and they have a brewer who owns the recipe. He leaves. We got to start over. We're going to find a new, like, what do I do? How do I, as an MSP, walk into that brewery or that bakery and say, listen, grandma's recipe, right? Like, I think it's Coke, even to this day. 2 different people have half of the recipe or something like that, whatever it is, right? Right? How do we as an MSP approach Johnny's Bakery or whatever, that small mom and pop where grandma's recipe is the secret sauce, and keeping, the junior baker from grabbing that and leaving with it? What do we do? How do we explain that to our small customer?
Yeah, it's Tim, and I think it's kind of what, Catherine or John was saying about the coming in and saying, what's a list of all the important intangible assets, right? And by the way, this guy has
He might not even know.
He might not even
They
know.
might not even know. Like, and in reality, is it even the MSP's job to bring this up?
But you're bringing a lot of value if you're going, hey, you're going to have to, I think that was his recipe. He brought it before he came in here. You might want to negotiate that now,
Yeah.
right? Or come up with some kind of agreement, right? So, yeah.
I'd like to hear from John. Like, what's a high level list of categories or steps or workflow that we should start thinking through with our clients on these kinds of things?
Well, I think Catherine actually covered them. Identify, classify, protect, and protect is train, contract, SOPs, and then manage. All the above. I mean, I wanted to just raise very quickly something that Tim picked up on, Tim Schnur picked, and that is, I listened to something you guys did previously. This falls between the gaps. It's not the IP department. It's not the legal department. It's not the information security department. It's not the IT department. Nobody's picking this up. If you go to a patent attorney and say, I'd like a trade secret program, I guarantee, I'm talking UK, it's a bit more advanced in the States. 80% of the patent attorneys, IP attorneys will go, I don't know what you're talking about. We don't do trade secrets. I'm not quite sure. Honestly, I'm not quite sure how to deal with it. So, people aren't getting that education. In my view, and I think we should sort of sharing this perspective, trade secrets are probably one of the most important intellectual property right that any business has. But as people don't understand IP, they definitely don't understand trade secrets. And so that's the kind of elephant in the room there. Nobody's got responsibility for it. Nobody really understands it, and nobody's putting this thing to bed properly. I also just wanted to very quickly, NDAs. I know what you said. Hey, what you said, Tim Golden. But NDAs are you've got to convince yourself before you sign an NDA. 2 things. One is, does the person I'm signing this NDA with understand trade secrets? Are the people, hopefully they're numbered, listed, I know who's going to be sharing this trade secret with, do they understand trade secrets? Have they been trained on it? Have they got a contract that obliges them to protect and defend trade secrets? Because if they don't, I'm not sharing my trade secrets with them, right? First point. Second point, I guarantee that every NDA you've ever come across has a term. 5 years, 10 years, usually 3, maybe 5. That's useless for a trade secret, because if it's my search algorithm from Google, right, that's protected by trade secrets. I don't want that to have a term if I'm sharing it with you. Not that I'd ever share it with you.
Right, exactly.
5 years, 3 years is useless because my trade secret can go on forever. If it's, as long as it's maintained as a trade secret, that can go on forever. Okay, we can talk about the Coca-Cola recipe. It's kind of apocryphal, but that has gone on forever. Trade secrets can go on forever. Unlike a patent that expires after 20 years, it can go on forever. A patent, by the way, really important. But every patent starts life as a trade secret. And then you determine what you want to patent because you're worried somebody else is going to invent, skilled in the art can invent and get there quicker. So you patent it. But patenting is, I've heard you guys say before, you're making that public. You're sharing that with the world. So, I'm going to retain some of that as confidential. I'm going to retain some of that as trade secret because I don't want to share absolutely everything with the world. So, as Tim says, I've gone a bit long in the tooth there. So I'll curtail it. But yeah, did that help? Did that answer your question at all? Or was that just?
Yeah, that was very helpful. Thank you. Yeah.
Catherine, I feel like you're trying to chime in there.
Yeah, I would love to kind of expand on something that John said, where he said, things kind of fall through the cracks, and who has ownership. And I see this all the time with clients where they ask, who should own this, right? And I think it's so important to, yes, you have an owner, you select a business function, But it's absolutely critical that you have cross collaboration across the organization where you involve cyber and legal and HR and security, and you get them all together to put processes and policies in place from, before an employee even comes into the organization all the way through to separation. And so that there's that communication and the connecting of dots. So when there is, and prior to that incident, is determining what is happening with an individual within the organization, right? HR has a certain perspective where maybe an employee didn't get a promotion and is disgruntled, and that same employee is trying to access files that they don't have authorized access to for their particular role. And then you look at security where they're coming in at odd hours, of the workday that doesn't align with their roles and responsibilities. Each of those things in themselves aren't a big deal, but when you kind of piece all of that together, then you connect the dots and think, well, there might be a bigger issue here. So you absolutely need that cross collaboration.
Good stuff. Really good stuff.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
we got about
one thing to add on that. And as you said,
hold on. Let me wait for a second. There you go.
Falling through the cracks, right? This still happens. Like I would say 90% or more of Fortune 500 companies, there is no one in charge of trade secrets, which is crazy because like intangible assets or intangible, if you did an accounting exercise and you looked at most organizations, John knows this extremely well. I'm sure Catherine does as well, but most of the value of the company is not in like plant and people and assets that they own, right? It's an intangible asset. It's this extra either brand or know-how or trade secret sauce, right? So it is crazy that even very advanced organizations are just starting to pick up on this and just starting to protect it because there has been this shift away from patents. So like I said, small businesses, this is actually a fun conversation for an MSP to have or an MSSP to have between them and a small business, right? Like Tim, like what are, in the brewery, like that's a great example, right? Like let's talk about like what has value, right? Like when we get this on the store shelf, like why do people drink it and why do people buy it, right? So anyway.
Exactly. So be thinking about what we tend to do is the one key takeaway. But before I do that, I want to kind of show a little thing bit over here, right? So let's see. Am I going to do this? All right. So it isn't good. So yeah. All right. So before we kind of end the show with one key takeaway, I just want to talk a little bit about, hey, IT Nation next week. Thursday, Team Tim is coming to you live on stage, right? So Jesse, myself, Tim, Alex Farling will be joining us, all emceed by our good friend Kyle Christensen, Alex, Kyle, and Wes Spencer, all part of Empath, Tim Golden, Tim Schnurr, and Jesse over here at Team Tim. And yeah, we're going to be talking about some KPIs. We're going to be talking about the better dashboard. You'll be able to come and see us live on stage at IT Nation Thursday at 3:30. How's that for my radio voice? And so before we wrap up, I'm very excited. Everybody be thinking about your one key takeaway because we're going to jump right into that right now. And since we'll start with, I'll start with me because I, here talking and can't shut up, right? So drag me over here and do this. So my one key takeaway for MSPs in starting to have the conversation with your client around trade secrets. I wouldn't even use the word trade secrets. When I'm doing that QBR, when I'm having that business conversation, ask them, if you were to quit today, what is one thing that you would take when you leave? Just ask them that one question, right? You as the business owner, if you were to quit today, what's one thing that you would take with you when you go? that'll start to strike that conversation, right? Jesse, what about you? What's your one key takeaway?
I'm going to go with, I'm going to smash two into one here. So I think you have tools that can help. You need to start thinking about this, right? So this one more thing for us to think about, right? But it's something that's really important because it could be an existential event, maybe not today, but a year or 2 years from now. So your data management systems or your knowledge bases, those have automations now where you can create certain spaces and do automatic tagging. Like Confluence is one that I'm pretty familiar with, right? They have automations now. So if you have a space that's for trade secrets, the minute you create something in there, it populates the tag, you export, it puts the tag on it. There's all those things you can do, right? So technical controls, the browsers that put watermarks on things and just create an atmosphere that employees know that these things are being monitored, and like good fences create good neighbors. And so that's my takeaway for today.
Awesome. And as you can all tell, I just lost my camera. It's doing all kinds of weird things. So, Tim, you go next.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, I'm not going to mention certain vendors, but these tools are doing things anyway. Maybe it's for compliance. Maybe it's for evidencing compliance or like data access, right? Like auditing, identity access management tools. The tools are out there. The better the fence you can build, as Jesse talked about, the better the neighbors are going to be. So the better you can combine it, the better. This same topic, I talked to Chris Johnson from MSP 1337. I just threw that link in there earlier in the week. So if you want to hear more on this, there's another 30, 40 minutes for you.
Yeah, good stuff.
But,
and John, what about your one key takeaway? And we're going to wrap up with Catherine right behind you.
Yeah, I can do one.
You can't narrow it down.
You know what? I really appreciated what you said. I think the language is a really big issue. If I trade secrets, people go espionage. James Bond. We don't do that, and it just puts people off straight away. So you're absolutely spot on to mention that. I'd say two things: the list, and then the people. As Catherine said, and I hope I'm stealing yours, Catherine, here, get the people engaged in the solution. That's the most important thing.
And then last but not least, Catherine, do you have some takeaways for us?
So my takeaway would be when considering intellectual property, intellectual assets, critical assets, don't only look internally to your organization and your employees, compromising those assets, but you have to think about the third parties that have authorized access to them because they can pose a huge vulnerability to your organization. And so that can be contractors, suppliers, vendors, even partners, JVs, and investors. So be aware of what you're sharing. Do they really need to have access to those critical assets? And try to lock that down and put measures in place.
Awesome. And so with just 2 minutes left, I'm going to pop this one up here. Let's see. Clickety clack. So for those of you that joined part 1 of Getting a Seat at the Table, we'll be continuing on the conversation from IT Nation next week. On the following week, which is the 17th, Team Tim will not be live next week on LinkedIn. We will be live in person at IT Nation. Someone asked, will it be recorded? I don't know, but if it is, we'll see what we can do to try to get the recording or whatever.
I don't think it is. It's only like 3 rooms for some reason. It's not one of ours. So
all right. So okay, it won't be recorded. At least not officially. There's always a way. Anyways,
there is.
We'll be following that up on the 17th with our good friends Wes, Kyle, and Alex over at Empath. If you haven't checked out Empath and you want to help educate and level up your MSP and your people within your MSP, go check them out. Good friends of ours. They're doing really great stuff over there. But we'll be back with part 2 of Getting a Seat at the Table, where you can then start maybe even talking about trade secrets, intellectual property, all of that fun stuff that we've literally been talking about today. So yeah, join us next week. We're so glad to have you here. I wish my stupid camera wasn't doing what it is, but oh well, I'm literally sitting here holding it in place. I love it, but when it gets wonky, it gets wonky. And there we are, 3:00. Any last words before we exit?
Thank you guys for coming on. This is
Yeah,
awesome.
this is a great discussion.
Catherine,
Appreciate
John,
it.
really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And let us end
Thank
with
you guys. Yeah.
Subscribe now.